And so the impulse to take a sponsored series and to write a story about X because there's an advertiser demand for it. That's a very basic sort of web transaction. Let's create a section because such and such company wants to sponsor an entire
one of the best initiatives that we ever took was to introduce and formalize these sponsored posts. So this is content which is paid for by the advertiser, written by our copywriters who are actually on the sales side of the house. And what's the number? Is it about 30% now of our ad deals have some sponsored post component?
About 3/4.
What?
75.
75? Wow.
So 3/4 of your ad buys include some kind of...
some.
But they're labeled sponsored posts?
Yeah.
They work well?
And actually that's reduced a lot of the tension between the edit and advertising side because there is this playground for the advertisers. And the readers are now sufficiently accustomed to the editorial flow being interrupted by advertiser messages that they accept it.
But can you talk a little bit about sort of the evolution of being sort of a small regional site into a larger one? And you gave up on Wonkat, which is sort of an insidery Washington site. You merged Valleywag, which was an insidery Silicon Valley site, into Gawker and made that focus much broader. Can you talk about sort of how that process worked?
The numbers, following the numbers has been, on the one hand, constricting, and on the other hand, liberating. I used to be actually much more dogmatic about what a site should and shouldn't cover. I thought IO9, our science fiction site, I used to think should only cover hard science fiction. No fantasy, no science news. And once you track the numbers carefully, and once you see that certain kinds of science fiction don't perform well with the audience, and some stories that seemed off topic actually do perform well, then you adapt. And it allows the editorial management to be much more laid back and hands off. And the same thing happened with Gawker, that we realized, I think probably in around 2007, that focusing on, frankly, old media that people weren't that interested in. People don't, my motto is Zuckerberg, not Zuckerman. People want to read about Mark Zuckerberg, they do not want to read about more Zuckerman. Because,
or Barry Diller or Sumner Redstone.
No, these frankly, figures of the past, and they own companies, in the case of Mark Zuckerman, the Daily News, that isn't that relevant to, certainly not to our audience.
Do you consider what you do journalism?
I don't consider that to be a very interesting question.
Because?
I don't know about you, but I'm completely bored by all these discussions about what is journalism.
Right, you were eye-rolling back there when they brought you on as a new journalist.
It doesn't seem very useful or relevant, and frankly, most good journalism is produced by people who don't care about producing good journalism. I mean, I come from the UK, in which news and entertainment have been fused for a long time, in which you have an incredibly competitive media market, a market that we've never really wanted to be part of, at least not directly. We never wanted to set up a Gawker London because it's frankly too competitive. The US has, the traditional media has killed itself, and it's provided a great opportunity for organizations like us because they have cared too much about the journalism, about the Pulitzers, about the respect of their peers, and too little about the entertainment of their readers.
Now, you're happy to use the benefits and shields, the shield law, literally, of journalism in the case of the Gizmodo case.
Well, we didn't really, did we?
Explain how that works.
I mean, they raided our guy's home office.
And you repeatedly said you violated the shield law, and that was your defense, was we are shielded by...
I mean, that won't be when this comes down, that won't be a relevant factor in any decision.
So if we shouldn't think of you as journalists, and we shouldn't think of journalism as an interesting question...
You can think of us as journalists if you want.
What's the best way to think of you? What's the best way to categorize you?
We break stories. We don't break all stories. We don't feel that we have some public responsibility to dig out corruption in Albany. If somebody wants to do that, they should either do that as a non-profit venture, or I guess if you're a large newspaper, you can cross-subsidize. We don't have that luxury. We're a small to now maybe not quite so small media company, privately owned, profitable. We have writers to pay. We have salespeople who need to make sales and make commission. And we don't have the luxury of taking on a public service mission. So we'll cover the news when the news is interesting to people, not when we think it's important.
Can you explain what social media has done to and for you, and what you're thinking about when you think about Facebook and Twitter and how that affects your sites?
I mean, it's a fantastic distribution channel.
Is it changing the way you write stories or the kind of stories you write?
That's a good question. Twitter, I find, is misleading. And when one writes stories that are designed to be picked up on Twitter, that can often lead to these navel-gazing future of journalism stories that are, Twitter seems like it's a rather closed, elite audience, and often the pickup on Twitter is not reflected in traffic. So the mass audience is clearly not there. Facebook is another story. Facebook is incredibly powerful. Our refers from Facebook have increased 5-fold in the last 6 months.
Can you write stories that are geared towards Facebook as opposed to stories that were one day geared towards Google?
One of our biggest breakouts on Kotaku, our video game site, was a story about Farmville, which got picked up on the main Farmville forum on Facebook. It was a gigantic source of traffic, bigger than Drudge for us.
And is Facebook and social media going to eclipse Google for you in terms of referrals?
I think it actually may have already, it may already be getting close. It certainly, Facebook has eclipsed the earlier social networks, social news networks. It's taken the place of Dig. I think we like to think that we used Dig to draw in new people to our sites, much as we're trying to use Facebook in the same way. But any media organization has to be quite careful and calculating of how sure this is going to be in the interest of the social network to integrate tightly with us. We're even thinking about doing a Facebook edition of the Gawker sites.
How would that work?
Which would be optimized for the Facebook user, and the likes of a person's friends would be actually visible on the site. But we have to be careful that what we do is to our advantage and not simply to Facebook's.
So that is the future of media, a Facebook edition of Gawker.
The idea of a personalized news and entertainment site, when you go to it, it feels like a place that your friends are at. It feels cozy and intimate that way. I think it's a very appealing prospect to the readers.